come to order. We welcome everyone to today's hearing to receive testimony on the efforts of the Department of Defense to ensure service members access to prescription drugs that are safe, high quality, and effective. We owe our service members and their families the best possible health care. This is a morale issue, it is a recruiting issue, and ultimately, it is a national security issue. DoD spends about $5 billion every year on pharmaceuticals. That is about 2% of the entire U.S. commercial pharmaceutical market. Now, to make these purchases, DoD must navigate many of the same challenges as the civilian health systems. For example, according to the FDA, almost half of the drugs on DoD's operational medicines list, a list that contains drugs necessary for war fighting that are essential for meeting the medical needs of our service members, about half those drugs are in shortage. This includes the blood thinner, heparin, a common anesthesia drug called midazolam? I probably still didn't get it right. Close enough. And morphine for pain management. The impact of these drug shortages can be devastating. A shortage could mean using a drug with worse side effects, or it could mean having to use the second or third line treatments for an illness rather than the treatment that is most effective. While there are many factors that can cause shortages, from spikes in demand to natural disasters to inspection failures, most drugs in shortage share a common feature. They are generics. That means they are no longer protected by patents, and they can be made by any manufacturer with approval from the FDA. Now, despite this, most generic drugs have very little competition. In fact, 40% of the generic drugs sold in the United States have just one manufacturer. Why? Because the profit margins for some generic drugs is so low that American manufacturers just aren't interested in making them. As a result, more of DoD's generic drug supply is coming from foreign manufacturers who can produce the drugs at even lower costs. DoD's reliance on overseas manufacturers is not limited to finished drug products. The ingredients used to make the medicines, called active pharmaceutical ingredients, or APIs, and the ingredients used to make APIs, known as key starting materials, or KSMs, are also increasingly sourced from abroad. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed the risks we face by importing more and more of our commercial drug supply overall. DoD relies on those imported drugs that gives potential adversaries the power to restrict DoD's access, which can result in harm to our service members, to their families, and to our national security. In addition, the U.S. has less and less visibility into and oversight of foreign manufacturers and their manufacturing practices, and that is particularly true with China. These problems have concerned me for a long time, and that is why I partnered with Senator Rubio to secure language in the fiscal year 2023 NDAA requiring DoD to develop guidance for risk management of the department's pharmaceutical supply chain, to report on supply chain vulnerabilities, and to establish a working group to develop policies for allocating scarce pharmaceutical resources. When a drug doesn't work properly, it can have serious consequences for service members. Bloomberg reported last year that an outside lab tested tacrolimus, an immunosuppressant used to treat soldiers who have lost limbs in combat. The results revealed that some generic versions of the drug might not work. Worse yet, they could cause kidney failure or seizures. So last summer, in accordance with Senator Rubio's and my provision, DoD entered into a cooperative agreement with an independent lab to conduct a pilot study to test the quality of 12 finished drugs in the military's drug supply. And in November, DoD revealed that 27% of the drugs on the FDA's essential medicines list are at, quote, very high risk because they are either dependent on Chinese manufacturers using Chinese ingredients or were derived from unknown sources. So we are holding this hearing today to learn more about these challenges and to discuss DoD's capacity to address them. I want to thank Ranking Member Scott for his commitment to improve the quality of life for our service members and for their families. And to our witnesses, I say welcome and thank you for appearing today. We will have two panels. The first panel consists of officials from the Department of Defense who will explain how DoD is currently addressing drug shortages and DoD's existing capabilities for biomedical research and development. I am pleased to have the opportunity to introduce them, which I will do in just a minute, but I want to see if Senator Scott has any remarks he would like to make first.
Sure. First, I want to thank Chair Warren for doing this. I think this is a very important issue. I think any of us that would have a health issue, we'd want to make sure that our kids and our grandkids, that they had the best medicine out there. And it sure doesn't seem like we're doing that. For several years, I've raised concerns over the pharmaceutical supply chain in this country. The COVID pandemic exposed vulnerabilities in our supply chains and the dangers of continuing to be reliant on communist China for medicines and other critical products. I don't know anybody logically would ever want to be dependent on communist China for anything. While the pandemic is over, these problems continue. America is far too dependent on communist China and other foreign producers, and our supply chains will be massively disrupted when Xi decides to invade Taiwan. I don't think that's a question of if, I think it's a question of when. If we do not take action and fix this now, the supply chain disruption that will occur when communist China strikes Taiwan will be extreme and cause unbearable pain for the United States and every American family. No one will be safe from the impact of supply chain disruption if we continue down our current path. Prices will skyrocket even higher. Product shortages will be widespread and severe. I want to make sure I think this is, I just can't imagine that we're buying essential items like medicines, technology, household goods, you name it. Everything's going to be affected, and I don't know why we buy anything from communist China. But today I want to focus on medicine and the pharmaceutical supply chains that our military depends on. I'm glad we have this opportunity to discuss how pharmaceutical safety, quality, and supply chain issues affect our war fighters. I think we all agree that Americans' dependence on communist China and other foreign producers for medicines is a significant problem, and it doesn't appear it's being addressed. I've been fighting for legislation to get this fixed. My American Drugs Act will create a strong incentive for companies to invest in domestic pharmaceutical production, address the ongoing drug shortages, and work to prevent future ones and shift away from reliance on communist China. The American Drugs Act seeks to fix this problem by leveraging the buying power of the federal government and requiring federal health programs to purchase American manufactured generic drugs if there are two or more American manufacturers of a generic drug. I think this bill is needed given the issues we face today, and as the chair said, it's not a little bit of money that our defense industry is buying. It's billions of dollars every year. The Department of Defense recently conducted a pharmaceutical supply chain study as required by 860 of the Federal Fiscal Year 2020 National Defense Authorization Act, and I want to thank Chair Warren for leading that effort. Concerningly, this study revealed the department has a high dependence on foreign material and foreign trade agreements to maintain current pharmaceutical capabilities. I don't know anybody in their right mind trusts anything made in China. The report shows that 54% of the pharmaceutical ingredients that encompass the products on the FDA's essential medicines list, meaning the critical pharmaceuticals that the department should have access to, are from sources that are at a high risk of disruption. Who would do that? Only a quarter of the drugs on the list have domestic manufacturers. As I mentioned earlier, during COVID, we learned the hard way that relying on non-allied countries for our medical supply chain poses a real danger. For that reason, it is imperative that we work to ensure DoD supply chains are independent from non-allied nations for necessary pharmaceutical treatments. In a future contingency, these supply chains could easily cease to exist, and I assume they will when China invades Taiwan. I'm also working on legislation that would have the DoD work with manufacturers to build up our domestic pharmaceutical manufacturing base. If we have a drug shortage in antibiotics, where about 90% of the key inputs to make those drugs come from China, it becomes a readiness issue because our strength comes from a ready and healthy warfighter. About 90% of drugs dispensed at the pharmacy are generic drugs. Letting a country like China control generic drug manufacturing makes us more dependent as we ramp up for possible conflict. Today, I look forward to hearing from both the Defense Logistics Agency and the Defense Health Agency to discuss the findings of the department's pharmaceutical supply chain study and their ongoing work to study and secure these supply chains. In addition to focusing on pharmaceutical supply chains security, we must address the specific medical countermeasure needs of the warfighter. The Walter Reed Army Institute of Research has a pilot bioproduction facility that can aid the transition phase from research and development to early-stage clinical trials for warfighter-specific vaccines and biologics. While this effort is small in scale, it is important that we discuss the success that General Bailey and his team have found in keeping our warfighter healthy and combat ready. History shows us that infectious disease have a high morbidity rate in theaters of war. As we look toward the pacing threat in the Pacific, I would like to understand the medical challenges our troops will face, what innovative tools RARE is utilizing to improve medical countermeasures in advance of a contingency. Lastly, I will discuss the ongoing pilot program on quality and safety of pharmaceuticals. The Department of Defense Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences is leading a pilot program to assess pharmaceutical product quality in the military health system pharmaceutical supply chain. While this pilot program is in the early stages, it will utilize the military health system as a representative example to conduct a thorough review of the pharmaceutical supply chain to include a risk assessment, analysis of our domestic manufacturing capacity, and analytical testing of drug products from various suppliers. I am deeply concerned by our lack of resiliency and transparency in this area. Look forward to hearing the results of this study over the coming years. And I want to thank all of you for being here. And I simply do not understand how we ever got ourselves dependent on China and why we're not doing more to get it done.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Senator Scott. So as I said, our first panel is going to be about drug shortages and R&D for the Department of Defense. And from my left to my right, we have Dr. Mark Dirtspa, Principal Assistant for Research and Technology for the U.S. Army Medical Research and Development Command. We have with us, I'm looking for my notes here, 13. Dr. Martinez-Lopez, it is good to see you. The Honorable Dr. Lester Martinez-Lopez, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs at the Department of Defense. Welcome. Dr. David Smith, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense Health Readiness Policy and Oversight at the Department of Defense. And Mr. Matthew R. Beebe, who is Legislative Affairs Director at the Defense Logistics Agency. And I understand, Dr. Martinez-Lopez, that you're going to give a joint statement to get us started?
I'm Mr. Beebe as well.
All right, and then Mr. Beebe will speak. Thank you. You're recognized, Dr. Martinez-Lopez.
Chairwoman Warren, Ranking Member Scott, distinguished members of the Senate Armed Services Committee, I am pleased to represent the Office of the Secretary of Defense to discuss the Department of Defense commitment to ensure access to safe and effective pharmaceutical products so that we procure and use in the military health system. In this testimony, we will inform the committee about the department's initiative to maintain a secure pharmaceutical supply chain, assuring our MHS beneficiaries receive the highest quality pharmaceuticals product available. Over the past few decades, production of most of American generic drugs, and particularly the ingredient needed to make them, has moved overseas. With this movement, national security supply chain concerns arise. Similar to civilian healthcare groups and other parts of the U.S. government, the department's core areas of concern are unstable sourcing of pharmaceutical and/or active pharmaceutical ingredients and the availability of domestic manufacturing for contingency scenarios. Consistent with the National Biodefense Strategy, Section 3.5, Guidance on Agile Therapeutic Development and Production, and the Executive Order 14017, American Supply Chain, The department is taking a range of actions to address these vulnerabilities. Specifically reference to the MHS policy efforts, the department's pharmacy and medical logistic teams established a pharmacy supply chain risk management working group. This group leverages existing and new assessment of all aspects of supply chain, with focal areas on the critical pharmaceutical for beneficiary care that are on the joint deployment formulary. We have begun the development of policies and procedures based on this effort to enable allocation of resources in the case of supply chain disruption. Another efforts to generate insights led by the University of Health Sciences, we are evaluating aspects of the MHS pharmaceutical supply chain to include domestic manufacturing capability, documentation of the supply chain security, and resilience. Our objective through our research initiative is to generate meaningful and actionable information on drug and active ingredient supply for supply chain resiliency. Using the MHS as a representative example, this study will conduct a thorough environmental scan of the pharmaceutical supply landscape, including a risk assessment, analysis of a domestic manufacturing capacity, and examination of the pharmaceutical supply chain, analytical testing of drug products from various suppliers, and a study of a proposed score system and the associated policy consideration. Through these studies, the MHS will gain insight into which manufacturers and associated supply chains meet reliability essential to the department's joint deployment formulary. In addition, the uses-led work, the Defense Health Agency Research and Development focuses on developing novel solutions at Walter Reed Institute Research. A rare structural and computational biologists harness the latest generation in electron microscopy, the next generation in sequencing, monoclonal antibody generation, machine learning technologies, and novel adjuvants in the design of the next generation vaccine candidates, which are then tested in preclinical models. Through a range of efforts evaluating the supply chain vulnerability and resiliency, we hope to drive more effective care while preparing for any potential shortfalls in supply chain. In conclusion, I would like sincerely to thank you for your continued support of military medicine and for inviting me here to discuss these important issues surrounding the health of our warfighters and DoD beneficiaries. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Beebe?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Ranking Member Scott, and distinguished members of the Senate Armed Services Personnel Subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Matt Beebe. I am the Senior Procurement Executive for the Defense Logistics Agency, or DLA, a Department of Defense combat support agency. I am grateful to have the chance to speak to you today about some of the work DLA is doing to improve visibility and transparency within the DoD pharmaceutical supply chain and ensure that our military service members have access to safe, high-quality pharmaceuticals. DLA's mission is to deliver readiness and lethality to the warfighter always and support our nation through quality, proactive global logistics. In support of that mission, DLA manages the full spectrum of pharmaceuticals for the military and their dependents all over the world, to include supply to military hospitals. Although our military customers set pharmaceutical requirements based upon the needs of today's warfighters, it is DLA who purchases those products and manages critical end-to-end supply chain logistics to ensure that military service members get the pharmaceuticals they need when they need them. We accomplish this by leveraging commercial capabilities and contracting with commercial distribution companies who use their global networks of sources to deliver FDA-approved medicines to service members at military treatment centers or wherever they are located throughout the world. In line with our logistics mission and to better serve our customers and the warfighter, DLA is always seeking to improve our ability to identify, manage, and mitigate logistical and supply chain risks, including those impacting pharmaceutical supply chains. One area of focus in this issue is foreign dependency of pharmaceuticals. A 2021 report by the DoD Inspector General identified that due to the dependency of the U.S. commercial pharmaceutical market on ingredients from foreign suppliers, a disruption of the supply chain of those ingredients to domestic manufacturers had the potential to cause drug shortages which could ultimately compromise the standard of care for military service members. Similarly, in November 2023, DoD submitted a report in response to Section 860 of the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2023 regarding risks in DoD pharmaceutical supply chains. In that report, DoD identified the defense supply chain for pharmaceuticals is highly dependent upon foreign or unknown sources, in large part due to the global nature of the pharmaceutical supply chain for both finished products and active pharmaceutical ingredients, or APIs. DoD identified several pervasive information gaps that hinder its ability to obtain visibility and transparency in these supply chains, particularly the lack of readily available and authoritative data on the sources of finished generic drugs, their APIs, and other key ingredients. Having this information would significantly improve our ability to illuminate the complex pharmaceutical supply chain and help DoD ensure that our military service members continue to have access to safe, high-quality pharmaceuticals. As the provider of critical pharmaceutical products to our nation's warfighters, we are steadfastly committed to working with the Department, other federal agencies, and Congress to strengthen our collective ability to identify, mitigate, and prevent risks in the pharmaceutical supply chain. DoD and the Department sincerely appreciate your interest in these issues. I look forward to addressing your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Beebe. So I'm going to start with the first round of questions. The Defense Health Agency provides care for about 9 million people in the military health system, and that includes by dispensing prescription drugs to service members and to their families. Earlier this month, the American Society of Health System Pharmacists announced that there were a record 323 active drug shortages during the first quarter of 2024. That is an all-time high in the United States. Dr. Martinez, you are in charge of ensuring the health and safety of our service members. When DHA can't get a critical drug because it's in shortage, can you just explain to everyone what options you have to ensure that service members and their families are receiving the care they need?
Chairwoman, thank you for the question. The health of our beneficiaries is most important to all of us. And when you face the issue of not having the right drug for that patient, then your choices are to go and look at alternate drugs that may not be exactly the same one for that condition or for that patient, may have a different side effect profile. So let me give you an example. And the other, amoxicillin, it may be a drug. It's a typical antibiotic made overseas, generic, used everywhere for basic infections. But let's say I don't have it. Now I have to take other antibiotic, and now at the same time I'm trying to combat resistance to antibiotic, I'm using an antibiotic that is not indicated for that condition. So there I lose twice. One, because I'm not giving the right antibiotic to my patient, but on top of that, I'm losing grounds on my fight against antibiotic resistance. In other events, like in an epinephrine injection, that can be a life or death. We don't have hours to decide what the alternate is. So that may translate into a life right on the spot. So this creates a conundrum for all healthcare professionals. And I don't think it's just us. It's across the nation we're facing this.
Okay, so worse health outcomes for the patient and worse health outcomes for the system overall is what I'm hearing you say. Now, according to the FDA, one of the leading factors contributing to drug shortages is quality issues. For example, an FDA inspection of a manufacturing plant in India revealed a, quote, cascade of failure at the plant's quality control unit. Investigators found problems with systems to prevent microbial contamination, to keep processing areas sterile, and to protect critical production documents, including they found a trash bag full of records that had been torn and doused in acid. The plant temporarily closed, resulting in widespread shortages of common chemotherapy drugs across the United States, affecting both civilian and service members. Now, as more of our drug supply chain moves overseas, these kinds of quality concerns are going to become even more common. So last summer, DoD launched a pilot with an independent lab to test drug products for safety and effectiveness. For example, it will test whether the drug contains any contaminants, whether it contains the correct dosage, and whether it has the expected potency. The pilot study is going to look at 12 drugs on DoD's operational medicines list, which includes drugs that are necessary for warfighting, and its pre-deployment medicines list, which includes drugs that help service members control chronic conditions to meet standards for deployment. Together, the pilot will test medicines needed to stabilize wounds, alleviate pain, and treat infections. Dr. Smith, can you share why DoD thought it was necessary to conduct this pilot study?
Thank you for the question, Senator Warren. As we've noted, we are most concerned about ensuring the access to safe and effective drugs. And as you noted, we're doing a number of studies, the 860 study that we've referred to, and then also the study for the Uniformed Services University that's evaluating, in particular, a quality scoring tool by De Bestiani that was published in the Journal of the American Pharmacy Association just last year as an additional factor for us to consider as we purchase medications on the market. And you pointed out the various FDA recalls and the issues that have been coming up. Additionally, we've heard that within the generics, where there are multiple manufacturers using the same API, that there may be a variance in those generics. Mm-hmm. And so we thought with all of those factors, it would be useful to conduct this pilot study that you referred to, that ultimately will look at 42 drugs from our joint deployment formulary to see if we can differentiate between the generics and make us actually a better buyer and actually reward manufacturers that produce the product that's spot on. Over.
Good. So you're talking about a study that you're doing because you hear a lot of problems out there, and also this may help you figure out how to respond to those going forward. Is that a fair summary?
I think that's fair.
Good, good. So when DoD is making decisions about purchasing drugs, price is often the most important consideration, but it shouldn't be the only consideration. Whether a drug is made by a reliable manufacturer or whether its active ingredients are made and where they're made should also inform purchasing decisions. The Defense Logistics Agency is responsible for procuring pharmaceuticals on behalf of the military health system, but DHA can put requirements on the purchases. Dr. Martinez, if DoD identifies significant risks to the safety of its drug supply chain, will DHA add requirements on drug quality to ensure that we're buying effective, safe, the best drugs for our service members?
Senator, based on the information the pilots will give us, I think we'll be in a position to, if that's indicated, to make it so.
Okay. So you can put that into your requirements, and you're telling me that if you're concerned about quality, you will put it into your requirements?
Yes.
For the drug. Good. That's what I want to hear. You know, I'm glad that DoD has taken steps to evaluate drug quality, and the department should be prepared to use this information to improve quality and accessibility of the prescription drugs that our service members need. Thank you. Senator Scott.
Thanks. Mr. Beebe, how many different drugs do you buy in a year? How many different ones?
Well, our catalog probably is in the tens of thousands of items. Of course, that's not all different drugs. Some cases, it's dosage differences, application differences, other
Okay.
things like that.
Tens of thousands. All right. So, and do you personally believe that we shouldn't buy things from Communist China?
I agree. It basically, or in reality, we follow existing regulation on how and where to buy materials, whether it be pharmaceuticals or other items.
Sure, but you believe do you believe that we should not buy from Communist China?
I agree, sir.
Okay. So in the last 12 months, how many drugs have we stopped buying from Communist China?
When we buy pharmaceuticals, we buy with a preference towards domestic or safe, assured sources, although in many cases we don't know where the sources are. Normally we buy from domestic or our trading partners, but we don't always have visibility of where the ingredients of those pharmaceuticals come from, which is why it was so important for us to initiate the study and identify where we believe the sources of the ingredients are.
But today you could just say that you're not going to. Today you could just say I'm not going to buy anything that has an ingredient that comes from Communist China. You could say I'm not going to buy anything that has an ingredient from Communist China. I'm not going to buy anything that's packaged in Communist China. I'm not going to buy anything that is in any way in the supply chain impacted in Communist China. You could do that today, right?
Actually, I don't believe the regulation actually supports that, in that very often the final product is manufactured domestically or from an ally, and if it is substantially transformed in those countries, it is in accordance with Trade Agreements Act or the Buy American Act.
So what's the limitation? Why can't you make that decision today?
Because often the final product is manufactured domestically or with an ally.
But you could set that as a standard, and then it's a requirement. You could set the standard that whatever you buy can have nothing in anywhere in the supply chain comes from Communist China. You could decide that today.
If that standard exists, yes, but that is not for DLA to decide. We have to follow existing regulations and policy. And
Who set a regulation that said you couldn't? The Secretary of Defense testified the other day that we should not buy anything from Communist China. So what regulation would it be?
That would establish that, basically.
No, what regulation would stop you from being able to do it today?
I can't say what that regulation would be, but I certainly support being part of the discussion with others across the Department of Defense.
Why don't you just do it? Let's just do it and see what happens. Why don't you just say tomorrow, you just do it. Like I'm a business guy. When I negotiated contracts with people, I ran the largest hospital company in the country. I was the biggest buyer of pretty much everything in healthcare on the provider side. And once I signed a contract, I said our hospitals couldn't buy any that day. We said like that. And we're not going to buy those gloves, that drug, that device, and that stuff. Why don't you just do it?
We do not buy end products from China unless it's the only source available and we can justify the waiver.
So you believe that if there's a product that there's a supplier in the United States today, you don't buy anything made in China if there's a supplier of that product today.
If the end product is available domestically, that's where we will buy it. Yes.
Do all of you believe that? So you'll be if I come back and tell you that there are suppliers here that compete with China that can't get contracts with you, you'll be shocked.
If we're talking about the end product, yes.
What's the difference?
Well, much of what we're talking about is the active pharmaceutical ingredients that originate from China that get molded into a final product. When we buy the final product, we're buying it from the United States or a domestic trading partner, and we can't, until recently, see whether or not there was some ingredients from China or other country of concern. It was not visible, and we are working to make it visible.
But why don't you just say you're just not going to, starting today, you will not contract, just put out there, you're not going to contract with anybody, if anything, just not just the active ingredients, there's no part of the process where Communist China is involved in it. There's none. Or any other, Russia, Iran, but primarily Communist China. Why don't you just do it right now?
If we made that absolute, then we would be creating a sufficient amount of non-availability for our health professionals.
But if you don't do it today, when are you going to do it? I mean, if you don't start today, when are you going to do it? Why don't you just take, if you do 10,000, why don't you start up with 1,000 and see how bad it is? I'm just a business guy, and I didn't buy from my competition. This is not competition. These people are trying to kill us. Oh, they are killing us. Chinese precursors are killing 70,000 people with fentanyl a year. So why don't you, what I'm trying to understand is that I think what all of you agree, Communist China wants to destroy our way of life. I think we all would, right? Anybody disagree? Nobody disagrees, right? So let's do it today. What I don't understand is why don't we do it today? I just don't get it. Can somebody explain to me why we don't?
Sir, there are some of the APIs that only originate from China that are critical to medications that we use on a daily basis. And so that would be one of the impediments that needs to be resolved to be able to go that direction, sir.
Okay, so Dr. Smith, how many is that?
I'm aware on the Joint Deployment Formulary, and this is specifically China, and as Mr. Beebe pointed out, we have an issue with Provence on a fair percentage of our joint deployment, but I'm aware, I believe, and I can take it for the record, but 27 drugs that the APIs are specifically only sourced from China.
And have we put out a bid for Americans to say, will somebody do it on those 27?
As part of our work on 860, it's part of what we're going through to confirm and work solutions to this issue. But we're well aware that there's a substantial amount of the APIs, the active pharmaceutical ingredients, that are coming from mainland China. Over.
So that's not 27 out of 10,000, right?
I should probably take it for the record, sir, and we can give you the information, but I think it's 27 out of 920 or so.
Okay, so can we just go, can somebody just, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
I just want to understand why we don't do it today. In business, we would just say, guys, listen, we had a nice meeting. We know that these people now, we found out these people are trying to destroy us. And we just say, okay, guys, we all decide, as of today, we will not do business with them. We did that in business all the time. Well, I don't know why we don't just do that. I don't know what the limitation. If there's a limitation, I want to solve it. Secretary of Defense has told me he doesn't want to buy anything from China.
Sir, if I may, the main limitation we have right now, like Dr. Smith said, is that many of those are some of these drugs are the API only made in China, and that's in the global market. So if we decide not to buy Chinese, we are avoiding, I think the number is around 5% of it that we know of all the drugs in the formulary that comes from, the API comes from China. So, and we don't know about 20-something% of them where the API comes from. So that creates a conundrum. So if we could source it some other place, that would be great.
And if I can...
Okay, so why wouldn't we do this? Okay, so there's different ways. There's all these different options. Number one, what I would do is just say I'm not going to do it, and everybody has to sign a contract that they will not do it. And let's see what happens. Let's see if I guess they'll come back and tell us, right? Or we could say, you've got 90 days to tell us, and so where all your active ingredients come from, and then we can make a decision. But it's like that. Like if I in my business life, I wouldn't say let's do a study. I'd say no, I'm not going to do it. So I'm just trying to figure out if there's an impediment. Just tell me what it is. Are you in the same position I am?
Yes, and I want to follow up on your point. Okay, if we can. So I just want to follow up on this about the risks we run from having overseas manufacturing that is either in China or some other nation that is not an allied nation, right? Because they all pose this risk, and we need to worry about it. So I mentioned in my opening remarks that Senator Rubio and I got a provision in the FY23 NDAA for DOD to put together a report, and it came out last November, about drug supply chain risks in the military. It evaluated 211 drugs, and it found that half of those were either at high or very high risk because the active pharmaceutical ingredients, the APIs for those drugs, are sourced from China or non-trade agreement act countries, or are just simply unknown. Nobody knows where they're coming from. So you identified, Mr. Beebe, that 27 APIs are sourced exclusively from China, but I just point out that's only a little over 10% of the drugs. It's not half the drugs we're talking about here. We've got a lot more drugs that, if you're right that it's only 27, then we've got a lot of other drugs that are being sourced overseas that we think there's a substantial risk. And so the question becomes whether or not we should bring that manufacturing back to the United States. Is that in our national defense? So let me put that question to you, Mr. Beebe. Should we be manufacturing these drugs domestically, and what is the risk if we keep running this manufacturing facilities overseas for China or non-trade agreement act countries?
So yes, ma'am. First of all, Dr. Smith is the one that made reference to the 27, but I'll go ahead.
Sorry.
I'll go ahead and address the question first. So yes, we studied the FDA essential medicine list, and that is what was the basis for the report that identified a high amount of APIs sourced in China or other non-TAA countries. Since then, we have doubled that population, adding some of the highest volume pharmaceuticals that are purchased by our medical treatment facilities, as well as the overlap with the joint deployment formulary to expand the amount that we have reviewed, and the results are essentially the same by percentage. As in, same percentage of those coming from countries of high risk, as well as the same percentage of unknown, which is to me equally troubling,
Right.
that I don't even know how to characterize
Right.
the risk. Do I support bringing more domestic capacity? Absolutely. I mean, not only does domestic capacity mean that we have better access, but it also means that the government can better influence prioritization when there needs to be decisions of priority.
Okay.
That is very important too. Yes, ma'am.
So let's talk a little bit about what's involved in increasing domestic manufacturing of these pharmaceuticals. Last summer, DOD released its inaugural DOD Biodefense Posture Review. This outlined the department's capabilities to counter biothreats and identified domestic manufacturing as a priority reform initiative. According to the Posture Review, we've reduced drug manufacturing here in the United States so much that we simply do not have the commercial capacity to manufacture what our troops need. And because the department's, quote, unique biodefense demands are small and not commercially competitive, reliable domestic manufacturing partners are actually hard to find. But that's not the end of the story. DOD has its own manufacturing capabilities with a proven track record of success. In 2017, DOD's Advanced Development and Manufacturing Biopharmaceutical Facility to help manufacture medical countermeasures became fully operational. DOD has a second biomanufacturing facility at the Walter Reed Army Institute for Research, RARE. The Walter Reed facility has developed many vaccines that DOD relies on today to protect our troops from a number of diseases, including Zika, Ebola, and adenoviruses. So, Dr. Dirtspa, You help oversee RARE, and RARE has developed many essential products that both service members and civilian populations use today. Can you explain why RARE was the best place to develop these discoveries rather than just leaving it to private industry?
Thank you, Chairwoman, for the question. So appreciate the opportunity to talk about DHA R&D's infectious disease research capabilities. So our two laboratories, the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research and then the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, have the capabilities and the subject matter experts to get after these infectious disease threats that our service members might encounter when they're deployed overseas or fighting an adversary or even in training. And so those capabilities help us find countermeasures for solutions to medical infectious disease threats that are not commercially viable in the U.S. because there's no market for this. There's no threat to the U.S. population in general.
All right, that's very helpful. Thank you, because RARE's pilot biopharmaceutical facility has been crucial in addressing these potential threats and keeping our service members safe, especially when private sector is not in a position to fulfill that role. As DoD considers how to implement the recommendations it has identified on domestic manufacturing, the department should also think about how to replicate the capabilities at facilities like RARE to strengthen supply chain resilience and to keep our members safe and bring that manufacturing home. Thank you. Senator Kane?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Scott, and I appreciate the witnesses being here. I have two questions that I would like to ask. While reliance on APIs from foreign countries that are adversaries presents significant threats, the good news in this challenge is that we're not alone. Not every other country is an adversary. We have networks of alliances unlike any of our adversaries. And so I wonder whether, and maybe I'll start with you, Mr. Secretary, have we discussed this challenge with nations with whom we have close economic, military, diplomatic ties and explored ways we can deal with those challenges in a joint way?
Thank you for the question, Senator. The answer is yes. Actually, we talked with a couple of the allies, trying to figure out their ability to produce some of the drugs that we could use. And to their amazement and my amazement, first issue is that we have to have a secure chain of supply because I owe to my service members a better.
On key pharmaceuticals used within the DoD, from antidepressants to.
It's a wide range, yes, sir.
Yeah, it's about a dozen medicines. What are we expecting to learn from this? And I suspect if we do learn something from this data, its application isn't just a military application. It can give us good information in the civilian space, whether it's Medicare or civilian, about really good data about drug abuse.
Yes, sir. And I think, as I had mentioned, we're looking at this quality tool that was actually pro-offered by a group of academic pharmacists last year to see whether or not, indeed, we can differentiate by manufacturer. So we're looking at all the indices in a particular drug, and then doing this additional, clearly looking at all of the good work that FDA and the regulatory piece does, but then adding on to it, testing, looking at potency, looking at the dose, and also looking at contaminants that may be used as fillers, et cetera, in the product. And then if we find anything, we've also contracted with 3 other academic institutions to do validation of that work. And then if it pans out, we think it will help us direct our buying towards those manufacturers that produce what we would define as the highest quality products. But it's a pilot, and that's why we've characterized it that way, because we don't know, and I don't think this has ever been tested, if you will.
I'm talking about the timing of the pilot. When do you expect to start, getting good information back?
It's to run 2 years. We started the actual work in November. They've just finished contracting with or I believe it's finished, but they're in the process with these third-party or additional partners in it. So we should start seeing beginning information, as Senator Warren said, and you have. We're doing the first 12 right now, but our intention is to do about 42 different drugs. So I would anticipate that clearly by early next year it will start flowing in, but the whole project is scheduled over a 2-year period.
Thank you. Senator Scott?
Secretary, let's think about because I think you're right when you're talking about how we can use this whole buying power idea. So let's think about it, see, and I haven't checked with the chair to see if she would be okay with this. But could you prepare a letter that we would send out to basically all of the healthcare community? We could pick, we could do it through like the hospital association, pharmaceuticals, everybody, and say, this is the problem, right? You guys have the buying power. We believe we ought to create a domestic market, right? And so if everybody start doing their part. So number one, the way I would think about doing it is, number one, if the chair is okay with this, we would do it with you and send a letter out to the entire healthcare community. I think they would probably read it if it came from you and from us, and talk about what you're doing, the concern that you've addressed today. And then maybe wait 30 or 60 days and then invite all the associations together on a conference call to answer their questions and get ideas from them about what we could do to help build a domestic market.
Senator, that's a very intriguing proposition. I haven't thought about it, but really, I would like to be part of it, but it has to be really the whole government. So I will ask help from HHS and other agencies. HHS has a lead for the country on this particular issue. And obviously, I'll have to clear with the secretary, make sure that it's appropriate. And if it is, we will pursue it.
So let's do this. If it's okay with the chair, let's start with us. If we can get other people to sign on, HHS, all these people, that's great. If they don't, let's go forward if we can. If not, we can do it if the chair is okay with it. And then after that, let's do a call and tell them why doesn't it not work. So,
Senator, I asked, you may well know, I didn't mean to ask, may I? But if I get that from my secretary, then I'll be more than glad to lead the effort.
yeah, let me know, because he said in testimony that he didn't want to buy anything from Communist China. So, and then Mr. Beebe, I mean, I think we all would like to have something happen. So could you come back, maybe, I don't know what's appropriate, whatever you think is appropriate, and maybe meet with the chair and me and our staff and just say, okay, what is the limitation and what can we do today? And if you tell us there is a limitation, then I think that at least the three of us that are here, I think we're all on the same page. This is crazy that we're doing this to ourselves and being dependent on China. We're all on armed services, and we'll work hard to get it through to fix through the NDAA. I don't know if that makes sense to you. Is that doable? It's 30 or 60 days. Is that realistic?
Yes, sir. I mean, absolutely, we want to be part of the solution. The illumination we're doing to try to identify the sources is the beginning of having some information to use towards that dialogue to figure out how we can move the market or adjust the market. And I will be glad to respond. Okay.
Let's try to do it in 30 days. We've got we got the NDAs coming up this year pretty quick now, because it's already it's May 1 tomorrow, right? So, but the faster you can do it, the three of us will work with you.
And I would offer that because that's very much a policy discussion, that we would want to include the other stakeholders from the department.
Sure. Yeah. But I mean, we have Paul on our team, and I know you have great people on your team. We'll work with you. But the faster we do it, there's a greater chance the three of us can get it in the NDAA this year.
Right. Let's make sure we've got Mr. Durstby in this as well, since I see RARE as the model for when the market has a complete breakdown and can't produce what it is that our military needs.
Well, ma'am, if I may speak, that's true to a point, I would say. We certainly have the ability in our biopilot production facility to make small quantities of vaccines. It does not have the ability to make any drug products, though. And we are still relying on commercial manufacturers to produce large quantities of those materials if we're going to use them.
I understand that you are small but successful, but I also understand, and I hope you're hearing here, all of you are hearing, how committed we are to redomesticating our pharmaceutical supply chain and production. And I think you are going to be part of that as well. Good. We're good? Yep. We're good? Senator Kane, you good? I'm good. All right. Thank you all. Appreciate your being here today. And I ask for panel 2 to come in. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being with us. The second panel will feature testimony that clarifies DHA's existing authorities to insulate service members from drug shortages and offers additional solutions. We have with us today, again from my left, Dr. Melissa Barber, a postdoctoral fellow at the Yale Collaboration for Regulatory Rigor, Integrity, and Transparency. Dr. Bryce H.P. Mendez, a specialist in defense healthcare policy at the Congressional Research Service, and Mr. Victor A. Suarez, a retired U.S. Army colonel and founder and principal growth partner of Blue Zone Bioscience and Supply Chain Solutions, LLC. So I will start the first round of questioning here. Most of the time, DOD will continue to purchase drugs from the commercial drug market. Oh, I'm sorry. I was going straight into them. I'm so eager to get to them. I apologize. If we could, we will start with our testimony. Dr. Barber, would you like to start us, please?
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you.
Chair Warren, Ranking Member Scott, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the invitation to testify today. I am a postdoctoral fellow at Yale University researching pharmaceutical markets. Both here and in my written testimony, I will endeavor to report, as precisely and honestly as I can, evidence from the academic and policy literature on drug market failures and other remedies. My remarks today reflect my own views, not the views of my employer or any other organization. No one here today disputes that the military faces challenges in ensuring a reliable supply of safe, high-quality pharmaceuticals. No one here today disputes the unacceptable risks this creates for the health and well-being of service members and their families, as well as operational readiness. So the task before us, then, is to unravel the root causes of challenges in the supply chain and to develop solutions. First, military procurement of medicines is exposed to many of the problems seen in broader commercial markets for medicines, including increasing costs and supply instability. Supply chains for many drugs are vulnerable to interruption. We don't even know the scale of the problem. A recent report by DoD noted that they couldn't determine the API source of 22% of drugs, but within the academic literature, we find that approximately 1/3 of generic active pharmaceutical ingredients produced for use in US markets were manufactured by a single facility, and an additional third were manufactured by only 2 or 3 facilities. This committee may not have jurisdiction over industrial policy, but it still must reckon with the downstream results of decades of policy decisions that have resulted in the concentration and offshoring of most pharmaceutical production. Second, economists widely agree that markets for medicines do not always behave like typical markets and are far from being free or competitive. We should leave our idealized, orderly supply and demand curves in the cloakroom. They will not be of much use to us this afternoon as theoretical lenses. We have to instead understand these markets on their own terms and through rigorous analysis of empirical data. Markets for medicines for military use are even more unusual. One factor is many are natural monopolies and monopsonies because they involve hyper-specialized goods, often produced in quantities too small to be manufactured cost-effectively by more than one company. Review of DoD contracts shows many such hyper-specialized products, all the way from anthrax vaccines, battlefield-suitable analgesic auto-injector kits, and nerve agent antidotes to the specialized medicines used by California Sea Lions that the U.S. Navy trains for defense purposes. When there's only one buyer and seller, the DoD is not bidding in a competitive market. The DoD is the market, and that demands that we think about market problems and market solutions in a nuanced, context-specific way. Third, for some drugs, there's an irreconcilable mismatch between commercial incentives and defense needs, which cannot be solved with purely market-based solutions. Pharmaceutical companies are incentivized to manufacture a drug if it gives them a good return on investment. A supply line that manufactures an expensive cancer drug that serves a wide market is just more profitable than manufacturing drugs with small markets, like anthrax vaccines, or drugs with low margins, like off-patent antibiotics. In contrast, the military is conscious of costs, but is ultimately incentivized to purchase drugs that meet operational needs and protect the health of service members. Sometimes, but not always, these incentives overlap. And when they don't, one often tried solution to bridge that gap is to pay pharmaceutical companies enough that it becomes worth their while to manufacture the drugs that the military needs. For products used mostly or only by the military, we have seen time and time again that the expected demand hasn't been sufficient to generate a healthy number of bidders. We therefore have to be realistic about when the DoD will be able to buy itself out of market failures. The DoD just doesn't have the spending power to fundamentally change the incentives that govern the commercial market to serve defense needs. DoD spending, as many have spoken today, accounts for less than 2% of overall spend in the United States. These limitations of using commercial markets to ensure a resilient supply chain for military needs bring me to my final point. When it comes to medicines for military use, we live and have always lived in a mixed economy. By this I mean that the public and private sectors have both played an important role in developing, manufacturing, and supplying medicines in the United States for over 160 years. The private sector has efficiently supplied DoD with many needed medicines. However, for many other medicines where the military is the sole market or where the commercial market has struggled to meet military needs, the military has brought manufacturing in-house. The history of the military producing medicines stretches back to at least the Civil War, when pharmaceutical manufacturing facilities were established in Philadelphia and Astoria to stabilize supply chains for the Union Army, with many other examples outlined in my written testimony. The public sector more generally has solved puzzles that the private sector wasn't incentivized to explore, like how to manufacture penicillin. And the public sector in the United States continues to successfully manage products as complex as vaccines and monoclonal antibodies today. We cannot afford to hold on to the hope that markets will always sort themselves out. At present, government creation of manufacturing capacity is usually done reactively, with initiatives created in response to particular crises. As one example, it took over 10 years and $100 million for DoD to bring adenovirus vaccine manufacturing back online after Wyeth, the sole supplier, held DoD to ransom to renovate their facilities at excessive cost. I bring up this history to dispel any misconceptions that military drug production is a new idea, rather than an idea older than the Department of Defense itself. In my written testimony, I detail independent review after independent review recommending that the military build on past successes and existing capacity and bring the manufacturing of priority products back in-house. I also detail decades of bipartisan support for this from the congressional record. Today, I echo their conclusions in recommending that Congress introduce legislation establishing clear options for creating a government-owned facility to manufacture priority health products to meet unmet DoD needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Barber. Mr. Mendez.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Warren, Ranking Member Scott, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting the Congressional Research Service to testify today. This afternoon, I'll summarize my written statement by starting with a brief overview of the medical research and development capabilities of the Department of Defense, or DoD, followed by a summary of why and how the department aims to use those capabilities to develop drugs. I'll conclude by identifying considerations that Congress may face with regard to DoD medical research, development, and manufacturing of these products. The U.S. military has a long history of contributing to the discovery of novel drugs and other medical countermeasures. Early and well-known contributions took place during and shortly after the Spanish-American War, when Army medical research efforts supported the discoveries of typhoid, yellow fever, and malaria vaccines. The lessons learned from the Spanish-American War and other conflicts throughout our nation's history have laid the groundwork for Congress and DoD to invest in, build, and sustain military medical research and development capabilities. Today, DoD uses these capabilities to protect service members from health threats, respond to medical capability requirements of the Joint Force, meet the needs of the National Defense Strategy, and to also respond to congressionally directed research topics. DoD's medical research and development enterprise includes a number of entities like the Defense Health Agency, the military departments, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and the Chemical and Biological Defense Program, among others. Congress appropriates research funding to these entities, who are then responsible for resourcing, performing, or sponsoring medical research projects. Two of these entities, in particular, provide DoD with capabilities to develop drugs using different approaches. One capability is the pilot bioproduction facility at the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research in Maryland. This government-owned facility provides a test ground for federal agencies, academia, and private companies to pursue early development and small-scale production of drugs so that they can be transitioned into advanced clinical trials. Another capability is the Advanced Development and Manufacturing Biopharmaceutical Facility in Florida, administered by the Chemical and Biological Defense Program. The contractor-owned, contractor-operated facility, which became operational in 2017, provides DoD with priority access and surge capacity to produce medical countermeasures. When DoD discovers a potential drug candidate, the department is generally subject to Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, requirements and procedures for review, approval, and clearance. Since at least 1997, Congress has provided DoD with an ability to request a presidential waiver of certain FDA requirements, including those for administering investigational new drugs or off-label uses of a drug, and informed consent for certain products authorized for emergency use. In 2017, Congress provided the Secretary of Defense with the ability to make requests to the FDA Commissioner for expedited review, approval, and clearance of certain medical products when there is an existing or potential military emergency. These authorities provide frameworks for DoD and FDA to share information and to collaborate and coordinate on the development of safe and effective medical products that serve the military's needs. Turning now to the role of Congress, I want to highlight two issues that this subcommittee may face. First, Congress could consider defining or clarifying the role that DoD should have in conducting in-house drug manufacturing. A question that Congress could consider is whether or not DoD should be in the business of manufacturing drugs or other medical products, and if so, for what purpose and to what extent. Second, Congress could consider assessing DoD's medical research, development, and manufacturing approach to better understand its effect on industry participation or engagement with the department. Congress has given DoD certain authorities and tools that it may use to generate interest and incentivize industry to work with the military. These authorities and tools include unique contracting mechanisms, technology transfer opportunities, and a process for expedited FDA reviews and approvals. Congress could evaluate whether DoD has used these authorities and tools as Congress intended, and explore how they might attract, influence, or deter companies from doing business with the military. This concludes my remarks. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mendez. Colonel Suarez.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Warren, Ranking Member Scott, and distinguished members of this committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Vic Suarez, and I've recently retired from the U.S. Army after 27 and a half years of active service as a medical service and acquisition corps officer, specializing in the advanced development of biologics, managing the medical supply chain, and leading America's finest sons and daughters as a commander 4 times, twice in the combat zone. During the past 10 years, I've been heavily involved in the advanced development of biodefense medical countermeasures, served as the Chief of Staff of the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, and was selected by General Gus Perna to serve at Operational Warp Speed from 2020 to 2021 as the lead vaccine program manager. I'm speaking today primarily in my role as a founder of Blue Zone Bioscience, a life science consulting firm. When I left active duty 6 months ago, my principal goal was to affiliate with organizations that were mission aligned with my responsibilities in the DoD, including enhancing national security and protecting human health, and to that end, supporting domestic companies that could support those 2 missions. To this end, I partnered with 2 organizations, the Council on Strategic Risks and the Securing of America's Medicines and Supply Coalition. Both organizations are focused on ensuring access to essential medicines for patients and the warfighter. On November 27, 2023, the Department of Defense, in response to the FY23 National Defense Authorization Act, Section 860, provided the Senate and House Armed Services Committee an interim risk report on the department's reliance on overseas-derived pharmaceuticals. A significant finding was that 54% of the national drug codes sourced from the DoD had active pharmaceutical ingredients, or API, and excipients, non-API, that came from non-Trade Agreement Act compliant countries, including China. This recent finding presents a clear and present danger to national security. It should compel us to explore better legislative and trade policies that strengthen our federal acquisitions and economic and health security to reduce our reliance on overseas essential medicines, their key starting materials, and API. We must manufacture more of these materials domestically to ensure high-quality manufacturing processes and products, including a reliable and resilient material medical supply chain supporting this essential industry. A major contributing factor to this national security and health security risk is a little-known but controversial court case titled Acetris Health, LLC versus the United States. In this case, the United States Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit overruled a long-standing precedent regarding the origin of a drug by ruling that a drug could be considered to be manufactured or substantially transformed in the U.S. and sold to the federal government, even if its API and all of its components, to include excipients, were manufactured in TAA-banned countries. Today, a Chinese firm could make all the API and precursor materials for a medicine, ship it to a U.S. subsidiary that does packaging and final labeling, and still be able to label it as American-made. This would be considered an American-made drug and principally illustrates this loophole. In my testimony today, I wish to highlight a dysfunctional market where generic drug companies compete in a race to the bottom in generic drug pricing and manufacturing, a principal driver of drug shortages, which just 2 weeks ago, as you mentioned earlier, Senator, was reported by the American Society of Health System Pharmacists that our nation is at an all-time high since 2001 of 323 known drug shortages. Overwhelming downward pressure in generic drug costs with no consideration for supply reliability or quality leads domestic manufacturers to operate at approximately 50% utilization capacity. Many of these domestic companies are closing plants and essential medicine production lines or being acquired by foreign entities, which will only downgrade our nation's ability to independently provide health care for its citizens during a global pandemic or during a national security event. Finally, I want to applaud the Department of Defense efforts to assess these strategic risks through both the assessment of the origins supply chain at the Defense Logistics Agency, as well as the Uniformed Services University Pharmaceutical Assessment of Quality Pilot Study, or FACS, as both these efforts will provide more transparency and potentially enable millions of our servicemen and women, their families, and other TRICARE retirees like me confidence that when they go to a military treatment facility in the U.S. or serve in combat, that they will always have access to the highest quality medicines at the most affordable prices, something that is possible if we're willing to disrupt the status quo. Thank you for your attention as I raise these significant considerations concerning our nation's over-reliance on non-trade agreement act nations for our pharmaceuticals, and I encourage Congress and this committee in particular to closely monitor and support the DoD's efforts to care for our warfighters, their families, and retired military. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Colonel Suarez. I appreciate it. So I'm going to start the questions here. Most of the time, DoD will continue to purchase drugs from the commercial drug market. But there are some instances when it makes sense for DoD to produce the medication itself. For example, when DoD is the only customer. An example is the adenovirus vaccine. While adenovirus typically causes mild cold or flu-like symptoms, it is a major cause of serious respiratory illness among service members, particularly during basic training. And that is why Rare developed an adenovirus vaccine, which it then licensed to private industry. But because there isn't a broad market for the adenovirus vaccine, it has sometimes been difficult to find a manufacturer that was willing to produce it. In fact, for over a decade, DoD was unable to vaccinate new recruits for adenovirus because the manufacturer decided to stop producing the vaccine, and there was no other manufacturer who was interested in doing this. Mr. Mendez, you've studied the defense healthcare system closely. So first, let's start with, how did this disruption affect the health of service members?
Thank you for the question, Senator. And that's correct. DoD exhausted their last supply of the adenovirus vaccine in about 1998, 1999. At that time, DoD estimated that the absence of that supply of vaccine would lead to about over 10,000 preventable infections from adenovirus, over 4,200 medical visits of recruits in the recruit training pipeline who were at risk for adenovirus, and over 850 hospitalizations within a year. To an extent, DoD did observe that in the absence of the vaccine.
Okay, so in other words, people got sick, they had to go to the doctor, there were even some deaths associated with these adenovirus, and all of that potentially affects warfighter readiness. You've got all these young people who are together, and the disease is moving among them. right? The virus is moving among them. So, Dr. Barber, you are an expert on pharmaceutical manufacturing. What did it take to finally get a new manufacturer to produce the adenovirus vaccine for DoD?
So after stocks were depleted in 1999, DoD does what it usually did. It put out a tender, and the previous manufacturer that had pulled out of the market, Wyeth, they agreed to do tech transfer, but only if DoD would reimburse them for it, which is quite the demand, given, as we've heard today, DoD developed that vaccine and had done tech transfer to them free of charge in the first place. So only one manufacturer even considered bidding at the time, Greer, but they withdrew because they asked DoD for $10 million up front, and DoD could not agree to it at the time. All in all, it's estimated that it took about $100 million and 10 years for new vaccines to become available again.
You know, this is just stunning. So DoD, as you say, does the research, develops the vaccine, gives it away to try to be able to get a manufacturer going. And they end up paying a private manufacturer, I think you said $100 million. Is that about right?
In the end, yes. That's
In the end, in order to build a facility to manufacture this vaccine that we need. On top of the money they paid to purchase the vaccine from the manufacturer, all because DoD is at the mercy of private actors who just aren't interested in marketing these products for a relatively small market. Now, Mr. Mendez, is the adenovirus vaccine the only example of a product that the private market has been unwilling to manufacture for DoD?
No, the adenovirus is not a unique case. DoD has many challenges in finding a lot of medical countermeasures over many decades. Current challenges that they experience and are working through include products to address anthrax, botulism, cholera, hemorrhagic fevers, tularemia, and other health threats.
All right. So, you know, this is a real problem with where the market just doesn't meet what it is that DoD needs. And this is going to continue. We're going to continue to have medications that DoD requires in order to keep service members healthy and that simply aren't profitable for private industry to come in and produce. Dr. Barber, what would be the advantages if DoD decided to manufacture these drugs itself?
So public manufacture is likely, depending on the drug, to be enormously cost-saving. So to bring back the adenovirus example, the current contract with Teva is worth about $38 million per year. That's actually a lot of money to pay for a single vaccine. As a point of comparison, it's about 80% annually of how much California has budgeted to build an entire insulin factory. A report by the Army estimated adenovirus factory startup cost at $100 million with annual cost of $10 million per year. So that works out to DoD breaking even from building and running a manufacturing facility in just 3 years. Besides costs, by manufacturing their own drugs, DoD could ensure reliable supply and support wider strategic aims in restoring domestic production capacity.
Okay, so you pencil this out and discover, at least for some of these drugs, it would be cheaper for DoD to manufacture it themselves, and it would have the added benefit of you know what your supply chain is. There wouldn't be any secrets in the supply chain. And we'd have a reliable source for these drugs. This is why I'm introducing a new bill, the Keep DoD's Drug Supply Secure Act, to direct DoD to manufacture the drugs, devices, vaccines, and other medical products when there is a risk of shortage or quality concerns. This bill gives us an opportunity to resolve drug shortages, to secure the pharmaceutical supply chain, and to ensure safe and effective drugs for our service members. Thank you. Senator Scott.
Thank you, Chair. Colonel Suarez, so you heard the testimony before, and Mr. Beebe said there's about 10,000 drugs that they buy. Does that sound about right?
When we're talking about national drug codes, we're talking in the thousands. So between 5,000 to 10,000 that they can source from within the industry for pharmaceuticals.
All right. And so today, is there just even one of those that they could just say, today I'm not going to buy anything else from China? Do you know of any one of them that they could do that?
No, but I think the fundamental issue that they could probably do that is with help from the Congress to address the loophole I mentioned in my opening statement, right? So the the department tried to do this, and I'm talking the VA, back in 2019, and they were challenged in court when they wanted to execute an executive order to buy American products. And they were challenged by this company, Citrus Health, to say, well, we make this product overseas, and then we do the final packaging and labeling in the United States, and we're going to call it United States. Well, that's not how precedent was defined for a made in America drug. That was always defined by where the API was made.
So you think we have to have a law that says that made in America means something different than what that court case said?
Yes, I think this is an
Can
opportunity.
you get that to us?
Yes.
If you'll get it, just and I'll work on that. So, okay, so let's say we get that fixed. Is there anything else that will prevent from somebody in Mr. Beebe's position from just saying, today we're not buying anymore? What else? What else would there be? Any other limitation?
I think some of the challenges that could be there is, especially in those areas where we're solely reliant on a supply chain that is only made in China, for example, right? And so right now, if you look at the API Innovation Center, they've really done some studies where they've looked at the supply chain. They call out 60 vital medicines in the United States. They estimate of the 60 vital medicines in the United States, about 20% of them are solely sourced, those APIs, from China. And then for key starting materials, it's about 45% of those vital medicines are solely sourced. That means there's no other supplier.
But let's go back to just on the solving the problem. Is the only limitation is if we get a law passed that says that made in America means X, that it's all produced here. We don't use any of their ingredients, blah blah blah, and no packaging, nothing. So is that going to give the Department of Defense the ability to fix it today?
I think that when that loophole is closed, I think it gives a clear pathway to do what you're suggesting.
Okay, I mean that's the only limitation.
I don't think that's the only limitation.
What else would it be?
I think an understanding that having quality differentiation in the marketplace other than cost is another big hurdle for us to kind of grapple with. And this is dealing with the status quo.
So you're saying that they only they decide based on price and nothing else?
Well, what I'm suggesting is that the marketplace for generic small molecule pharmaceuticals is primarily based on a cost basis and no real measure of quality in that decision matrix.
So I'm a business guy. So in business, I wouldn't buy just based on price.
Correct.
You think we do that?
Unfortunately, that's where the market's going for that commodity.
Why?
Because what has happened over the last couple decades, and this really happened after around late 2021 when we voted for China to be a most favored nation, and they all of a sudden grew their economy, and we started to transition our manufacturing overseas. What they found was they used their most competitive advantages, and that's access to cheap labor and their inability to really focus on environmental concerns in manufacturing. So they could lower the price of goods very low to the point where they could target specific industries like the pharmaceutical industry and even specific drugs and actually push some of our companies either out of business or from stopping making critical medicine.
So is there anything else we need to do to pass to stop it?
I think part of it also is you could leverage Defense Production Act to incentivize and pass legislation for funding to actually bolster our domestic supply chains and manufacturing in the United States. Basically create incentives for the marketplace to say, hey, there is an initial incentive, just like the CHIPS and Science Act, to manufacture in the United States.
So why don't they do it now? We got the Defense Production Act right now. Why don't they just do it? What I don't get is everybody. I think we've all come to the conclusion China's bad. They want to destroy our way of life. Why are we buying their crap?
Part of it is because in the past 20 plus years, they've done a very masterful job of integrating into our biotech and biopharma and pharmaceutical manufacturing industries. They've started with early innovative companies when they're small biotechs and they're desperate because they're cash strapped. So they basically hire them as contract research organizations, and they develop those drugs and products throughout the life of that drug application. And so as that company matures and they get to licensure, their entire supply chain might be dependent on materials from China.
So do we need to prevent China from being able to invest in our pharmaceutical industry?
I think we need to what I would suggest to the Congress is that they place limits on those known companies that have either stolen intellectual property or have a bad intent to take American technology.
Do we need legislation, or can they do that on their own right now?
Well, so companies can make those decisions
No,
of.
can the Department of Defense prevent somebody from investing, a Chinese company from investing?
I don't know if the department could do that directly
Why
without
not?
getting challenged in court. And
So
I
why,
think-
I don't get this. I mean, we don't buy stealth bombers from China. So why do we buy drugs from China?
because so what I would offer is that when you look at things like the Berry Amendment, those were originally designed like in 1941, and they focused on important things like textiles and food and all those to support defense purchasing of those critical commodities. What I would suggest is either you amend that to include pharmaceuticals and medicines, or you address the citrus loophole that I mentioned. And once you can do that, and this is not an original idea from me, the API Innovation Center pointed this out about 18 months ago. And so what I would say is, once we fix that through legislation, a lot of the other things that you're suggesting can more easily occur without challenges in court.
Okay, so if we want to solve this, name the list. We got to change that court case, and that's one.
Yeah, so that's one. The second one is we need to continue. I would encourage the DoD to continue monitoring this quality assessment pilot so that we can better understand that healthcare systems actually can buy low-cost drugs that are of high quality. Because some initial data shows that that is very possible. And the third thing
We
is...
do it in the private sector every day, so it's all possible.
Yes. Yes, sir.
So we don't have to have a study. I mean, that's pretty basic stuff.
The study actually generates the data that's irrefutable that you could use to justify the decisions. So, yes, sir.
We do it every day because we like our products to work. Every manufacturing company buys based on quality because they like their end product to work. So,
Yes,
that
in
hard.
normal markets, you're absolutely correct, sir. That's how normal markets work. Unfortunately, in the pharmaceutical industry, that has not been the standard.
because we didn't do any testing.
No, it's not that we didn't do any testing. It's that the regulatory agency had a very difficult time as we transition our manufacturing over to Asia, mostly India and China. We've lost an ability to actually regulate and inspect those manufacturing plants.
Yeah, but we can inspect it afterwards.
Right, but the problem is we have such a big backlog right now, and now when they're checking these facilities, they're finding egregious problems. And that's why some of those plants are shutting down as they remediate those problems, and thus that increases more drug shortages. And that's part of what we're seeing right now.
Okay. So we got the court case, assess, what else?
And then I think really provide incentives to industry to domestically manufacture more essential medicines here, not only the finished product, the API, and the key starting materials.
Yeah. Well, I think it'll happen except for what Dr. Barber was talking about. I mean, some things are going to be so small you can't do it, but there's enough money if it's big enough, right?
Correct.
If we say we're going to have a domestic product, you can do it. So, but I agree. I don't disagree with what you're saying. There's going to be some markets that we're not going to be big enough, and this is going to be cheaper. I mean, there's two options. One, pay somebody to do it, like what you said, or do it ourselves. So,
Let me add one other thing, too.
Yeah.
There are some really good initiatives that are happening in the United States right now, for example, in Senator Kane's state, for example, with Civica RX, a public benefit corporation, working with Flow and ANPAC, where they are actually going after these most essential medicines. That's a model that actually could be expanded across the country to address those critical, essential, low-cost generic medicines. And so I think we are starting to see more and more examples like what we see in the state of, or the Commonwealth of Virginia that could actually help correct the market over time so that we can actually address these critical risks.
thank you.
Good, thank you. Dr.
It was just a note to say that in terms of market share, DoD spend really is quite low. I mean, $7 billion is not very much in multinational corporation terms in terms of global markets. So it really is a drop in the bucket, and the market power just isn't there for most products.
But wouldn't you, I mean, I agree, that makes sense. But what you would think is if we got everybody to work together, like if all of our allies were part of this, which we should be able to do, there's still going to be things that make sense that you can't get somebody's not going to have an incentive because not enough profit margin. But if we could get everybody to buy together, you could, in theory.
We have received a letter.
A major limitation is the data still isn't there in terms of where provenance is. And thank you for bringing up the Acetrus case. It is incredibly important. And I would encourage the committee to reach out to the DLA for legal counsel in terms of kind of what their powers are. I am heartened. I've been doing API research for a long time in terms of capacity building and distribution, and I'm heartened that in the last 3 years people have started to take it really seriously in terms of initiatives to map supply. But they're still very ad hoc. There's no systematic mapping. FDA isn't doing it. EMA isn't doing it. The WHO isn't doing it. We have to share data with everyone, with our allies, with all countries. So it has to be an international effort to map how many factories are making a given drug. Where are they? What's the capacity? We need to do this systematically. We can't rely on ad hoc measures.
You know, I very much appreciate this. What I think we're hearing over and over is we need to bring pharmaceutical manufacturing back to the United States, and that it is a critical national defense issue. It is also critically important for the health of our people. And I hear this break into two parts. One is commercial manufacturing, which, as you rightly point out, we don't have the right incentives in place. We don't even have the right information in place to require meaningful domestic manufacturing and meaningful insight into the supply chain to know that we are safe in the drugs that we are getting and into the APIs that we are getting. And that's one part of the problem. And then the other part of the problem is the manufacturing challenges for what are much more modestly scaled projects that we are going to have to move to military manufacturing. Otherwise, we're just not going to get this stuff, or we will pay prices that are so outrageous that we would have been a lot better off. It would have been cheaper to have built it internally. And so I think those are the two challenges we face, and I know that we both want to work on here. I want to thank all of our witnesses for their testimony today. I also want to thank John Clark, Gary Lealing, Noah Sisk, and Katie Magnus for their work in helping put today's hearing together. We have a letter from the National Association of Manufacturers. They have asked that it be included in the record. Any objection? Without objection on that. With that, do we have a period of time for questions? Nope. All right, we've got 7 days for questions for anybody who wants them. You'll have 30 days to reply to those if there are answers that are needed. And with that, this hearing is adjourned. Thank you all.